back in. I personally got a little bit more coffee. The morning here in Denver, Colorado is starting sunny and cool, but warming up quickly. And so how fitting to continue our conversation right now with Valérie Courtois, who will be first speaking about implementing the vision for Indigenous leadership and conservation. And then she'll introduce and moderate a remarkable group of Indigenous leaders working on a variety of ways on large landscape conservation goals. Mademoiselle Courtois is the director of the Indigenous Leadership Initiative and a member of the Mashtouiash First Nation. She is a registered professional forester who specializes in Indigenous issues, forest ecology, and ecosystem-based management and planning. So to kick off her remarks, we will start with another brief video highlighting the Indigenous Guardians. Indigenous Guardians are trained experts who manage protected areas, resource animals and plants, restore those riparian environments, test water quality, and monitor development. And then we will hear from Valérie herself.
We're naturally land stewards. It's a responsibility we have to protect our land.
It's a sacred part of who we are. Our environment is deteriorating.
The caribou declining at such a drastic rate.
Rivers have been really low, our snow depths have been really low.
I've seen over the years the effects of climate change have not been kind.
What our communities are really excited about is having our own people as eyes and ears on the ground.
We travel this land all the time. We know more about the land than anybody else.
Guardian is somebody who protects the land.
There's so many amazing Guardian programs happening right now.
There's a movement across the country. We need more land guardians.
C'est une campagne positive, c'est une campagne qui mobilise, c'est une campagne qui va rassembler.
It's allowing us to now take our power back.
It's just more powerful when you work together.
Well, the more people, the better.
Land needs guardians.
Thanks, everyone, and good afternoon. Kwe ninu Valérie Courtois, Mastoyats Nuchin, and so hi, as mentioned, my name is Valérie Courtois, and I'm a member of the Innu community of Mastoyats, which is located on the shores of Piquagamit, or Lac Saint-Jean, in what is now known as Quebec. I now live and work with my family in the easternmost part of our traditional territory called Desinan, which is now known as Labrador, and I'm calling you from my home in Goose Bay, Happy Valley Goose Bay. It's a real privilege and honor to be here with you, and it has been a privilege and honor to work with the amazing team of leaders and experts within the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. Just a quick word on the ILI. We're a network of leaders from across the country who have all in one way or another worked on the assertion of Indigenous nationhood. And our approach is that strong nations can make strong decisions on lands and waters. You are, I love that we started with the video. You are all witnessing a real genuine movement that is happening in what is now known as Canada, one where Indigenous peoples are reasserting our nationhood as the peoples we are. At the core of that nationhood is our identity as peoples, our relationship with our lands, waters, and the species that inhabit them. This movement is indeed essential to ensuring the sustainability of our ecosystems and our relationships with them into the future. You've all heard how up to 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity is located on lands managed or controlled by Indigenous peoples. That's certainly true here in what is now known as Canada. Just for context, for folks on this panel and in the audience, there are 51 nations within Canada, 634 of them First Nation communities, over 51 Inuit communities, and so many Métis communities. Every inch of Canada is Indigenous lands. Our efforts as peoples for the recognition and respect of our rights and titles have always been motivated by our responsibilities to our territories and the needs to protect them. For example, the Cree Nation in Quebec, in their efforts to responding to the pressures related to the development of what was at the time the largest hydro project in the world, the James Bay project, was really about ensuring that their lands were protected and could continue to sustain their lifestyle. This is true of my nation as well. My people, the Innu, have survived in a rugged landscape for millennia due to an understanding of our intimate relationship with our lands and environments. We know that healthy caribou is a key factor in ensuring our health and survival, and that relationship is amongst the most important we have with our natural landscape. This understanding includes an understanding about our natural laws and our own system of laws that are an expression of that responsibilities as peoples to our lands and waters. You know, rights, the other side of the coin of rights is responsibilities. Some examples of those laws include notions like to take only what we need, to use everything that we do take, show respect to all. And a few examples of this include how we speak about our relationship to animals. For example, you'll rarely hear Innu hunters say, "I harvested so many animals." They may reference the fact that many animals were harvested. This is really about showing and removing yourself from the act and recognizing that you are a part of a system and dependent upon those dynamics within the system. Some of you may also know about our painted caribou coats. Our nation is well known for its art on painted caribou skin coats. And the idea of those coats was to please the caribou, that the more beautiful and intricate and work that went into those coats would result in an appreciation by the caribou and increase our ability to maintain our relationship with that animal through something like hunting. This ethic and these laws are also extended in our own ways of leading on the issue of conservation. And, you know, the notion of conservation within our peoples is not new. We, of course, always practiced conservation acts, whether that is through leaving certain areas of our territories alone for certain practices or being watchful of our own behaviors in these landscapes. And nations have been really using and making the most of opportunities in front of them to assert that responsibility wherever they arose. We've also been pushing for recognition of our contributions to science. And I've had many a conversation in my own profession as a forester and conservationist about the value of and content of Innu science and the need to recognize that science in efforts for conservation. We've used our own tools where we could, and I just want to note the inspiration of efforts like tribal parks and certainly recognize the tribal park at Mears Island, which just celebrated, I believe, 37 years of establishment. I think their 35th anniversary was in 2019. Also models like Waihanis with our friends at the Haida Nation, which really emerged out of an assertion by the Haida Nation for the need for their own decision-making and leadership in determining what is appropriate for Haida Gwaii, their homelands. An interesting feature of Waihanis, and I encourage anybody on the line to research that agreement, is that it's an agreement that starts with a disagreement. On one hand, the Haida Nation says we are the people of Haida Gwaii and our responsibilities derive from our relationship and respect with the Creator, and therefore we are the nation to decide what is happening on Waihanis. And of course, on the other side of the agreement, Canada says, you know, we are the nation of Canada with the jurisdiction to implement our vision and values on these landscapes. And then the rest of the agreement is about what they agree on, which is that there is indeed conservation values to be protected in Haida Gwaii through the Waihanis agreement, and also the role of Haida Watchmen, which is the first kind of modern expression of guardians that we've seen here in Canada. The participation to the Indigenous circles of experts and the pathway to Target 1 was very well explained by Nadine, and it was great to see Nadine on the panel, Nadine Spence of Parks Canada. And the ILI was an active and cheerleader of the ICE process. We really think it was an important effort by the government of Canada to further understand what it means to implement an Indigenous-led approach to conservation. The current movement to ensure what needs to stay on the ground is respected and honored for the essential values that they provide and contain, while striving to develop economies of uses of our lands that honors and respects our responsibilities to those landscapes. And I've had many conversations with local elders about how our responsibility as peoples who are involved in the management of our lands is to use the best available information in front of us, no matter the source. And that is where the adherence to the best available standards for our plans, including ecosystem-based management and forest certification in the case of forestry, are great examples of that. And Indigenous peoples have been instrumental in the creation of things like the Forest Stewardship Council's standard for the boreal forest and forests in Canada generally. In fact, we're the only country that has what is called an Aboriginal chamber within that structure to recognize the centrality of the role of Indigenous peoples in ensuring sustainable management of those forests. Note that this movement is really not about being against development. This is about determining what is right in terms of our landscapes and what fits within a paradigm of responsibility and reciprocity to our lands and waters where that's possible. In many ways, it's a movement to ensure that we're fully able to describe, plan for, and implement our own visions of what Indigenous-based economies could look like. And in some cases, that's expressed in a conservation-based economy. And for those who want to learn more, you only have to look to the leadership of our friends with Coastal First Nations and the role of guardians within the expression of their vision of what a conservation-based economy looks like in the areas of the Central Coast of British Columbia. The movement for IPCAs, or Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas in Canada, is indeed growing. And it is in our estimate, essential to Canada meeting its global commitments to both biodiversity conservation, but also to climate change. And my friend and colleague Brian O'Donnell spoke to that well in the previous panel. In fact, up to a third of the solution to achieving the Paris targets rests in conserving landscapes that are sequestering carbon. And there is no more important forest globally to that effort than the boreal forest within what is now known as Canada. In fact, there is such a movement for the establishment of Indigenous protected and conserved areas that they represent up to 500,000 square kilometers in proposals, which would significantly contribute to the sequestration of carbon within the forest. And it is, I think, the value of addressing the dual challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss all in one that is part of the interest in the Indigenous-led model that is being developed here in Canada. We, of course, have a very recent memory of previous conservation efforts that were led by the state of Canada, and we only have to look to our national park system here to remember very clearly previous colonial efforts in the establishment of those parks and how in many cases they resulted in the exclusion of our peoples and the severing of the relationship with their own territories. This is why, as Nadine explained, it is important and essential for agencies like Parks Canada to rethink that model and to adhere to what is a larger effort within our country of reconciliation from the history of colonialism. Of course, conservation isn't just about lines on a map. It is indeed about how we behave and note and ensure that the values that we're protecting and that the laws that we are applying are working, and those values and goals are being not only maintained but hopefully enhanced in these landscapes. And that's where guardians come in. And again, thank you very much for showing that video. It's so hard to speak about the value of guardians and the impact of their work without the use of tools like videos, because I it's so essential for you to see not only kind of the breadth of the work that they're doing, but also the impact of that work. And of course, as I said, that model is not new. It emerged in a modern sense, first led by the Haida Watchmen. And since that time, the programs have steadily grown. In fact, in 2014, we worked with partners at Nature United, then known as the Nature Conservancy, and Makeway, then known as Tides Canada, to gather the existing programs. There were just over 20 of them at the time, to ask what would it look like for your programs to be sustainable, and how can you see your model growing with other nations. And luckily, they gave us 3 avenues to pursue. The first was to look at networking. That was the first time they had ever met, and in many cases, it was quite a surprise, a pleasant surprise to realize that there were other nations who were thinking in a similar way to theirs about stewardship and the importance of having people occupy those landscapes. The second goal that they related was that all programs at the time depended on short-term project-based funding in many cases. There was a few exceptions to that rule, of course, the Haida Watchmen being one. But the stability of funding is an essential factor in the success of these programs on the ground. And the third one was that the profession of guardianship should be recognized in this country, including the need for coordination and building upon experiences, and to develop meaningful training and education opportunities for those guardians. The Indigenous Leadership Initiative, as the only Indigenous-led organization, has really been committed to fulfilling that vision that emerged from the Guardian program. And since that time, through efforts by not only the nations themselves, who had stewardship programs on the ground, but also our network at the ILI, we were able to convince the federal government to invest initially $25 million in 2017 for Guardians as a pilot program to learn how to work together. And at the ILI, we were very committed that this should not just be another program in the government of Canada, where they come in and say, here's some funds for you to meet the following values. This really had to be an expression of a new way of working with the government of Canada in a nation-to-nation spirit, which is, of course, what we've been asking for as nations for a very long time here. And for those decisions to be indeed Indigenous-led, which is why we've helped in the creation of the Joint Working Group, which is an Indigenous majority group that determines the best way to invest those funds and ensure the success of the model on the ground. As we really wanted this to be a true pilot in the very definition of that concept, so that we can therefore build upon it and grow over time. Most recently, in July, the Government of Canada announced a further investment of $340 million to further support Indigenous-led conservation and stewardship on the ground. And that investment includes up to $173 million for Guardians, both through the Environment and Climate Change Canada, as well as Parks Canada. The ILI is working with both of these departments and agencies to help ensure that the implementation of those new funds is done, again, in the spirit of a nation-to-nation relationship, and supports an Indigenous-led process for that. The efforts for Guardians and their work is really not just about getting people on the ground and why and why it matters. It's also about changing our lives on the ground. And the impacts of colonialism in many ways has been a result of our removal from our territories and our practice and cultures relating to those territories. And when people go back to the land, we can actually see a return on that investment. The ILI and other partners have worked to quantify some of that return on investment. And what we found for nascent programs in the North is that that return on investment could be anywhere from $2.50 to $4 for every dollar invested. What that translates in is in things like better retention or learning of our languages, reductions of rates of incarceration, reductions of rates of violence against women, increased connection between generations within our communities. We've had stories of guardians who, as young folks, had not learned their language and therefore could not converse with their own grandparents who were only Indigenous language speakers. Now, as a result of becoming guardians and learning their languages and learning the practice of the relationship with the landscape, those guardians are now able to converse with their own family members. I can't overstate the importance of that sort of result. In fact, in many ways, that is the key to healing from our colonial experience, is to regain and reappropriate our roles with our lands and waters and the species that inhabit them. On a comment about the 30 by 30 effort, we've been supporting land use plans, or land relationship plans, as my colleague Stephen Nita likes to refer to them, for nearly 20 years as a collective within the boreal forest in Canada. And what we found is when Indigenous peoples are holding the pen on those land relationship plans, that they tend on average to protect over 60% of their landscapes. And so in many ways, the globe is catching up to Indigenous ambitions around conservation. And it's interesting because that's what science tells us, that in order to maintain biodiversity values on any given landscape, we need significant and bold conservation efforts to be put in place. The 30 by 30 and previous goals of 17% and 25 by 25 pushed by both the Convention on Biodiversity, but also domestic targets within Canada, has created a space for dialogue, a space for partnership between the Government of Canada and Indigenous nations within Canada. That dialogue has been very fruitful for both parties. Not only is it allowing Indigenous peoples to increase its authorities over landscapes, but it's also allowing the Government of Canada to further meet its own goals, not only in conservation, but also in reconciliation. That achievement is of global importance. Canada is one of 5 large countries that contain the most lands and the most remaining biodiversity globally. We have a global responsibility to fulfill our needs and that of others. And in fact, just to give you a few stats, because I wasn't able to listen early on, but the boreal forest alone contains 1/4 of the world's wetlands. And we all know the role of wetlands in sequestering carbon globally. It contains over 10% of the world's freshwater. Between 3 and 5 billion birds are born every year in the nursery that is the boreal forest. We still have large, wide-ranging species that are in their natural state, which are all values that I imagine and hope that are important to everyone around the globe. In many ways, people are breathing, around in this world because there is such a thing as a boreal forest that's doing the breathing with us. And so I just think that I might leave it there for now. Just a few thoughts about the excitement of the movement in Canada, and a shout out to the amazing work that's being done on the ground by the nations themselves. We're so proud to be partnered with over 30 various nations in different regions in Canada that are really leading the way in describing and expressing what their own nationhood and vision for conservation could look like. And we really do hope that this movement is creating space globally for Indigenous peoples right around the world to be recognized for the contributions that they're making, not only to biodiversity conservation, but also the response to climate change. Thank you very much to Nishkabit now.